So this is kind of interesting to me. I just pulled up Google News, and the first things I see are a gargantuan Bucky's is going to be installed somewhere in Kansas City. At why do dogs sniff each other's butts? And the hammer-headed bat, the African megabat that looks like a gargoyle and holds honking pageants. This is what Google picks for me.
That's so weird. I wonder what you did for it to get to that point. I always wonder. Sometimes the algorithms will suggest some shit and I'll feel personally offended, even though it's like coming from an algorithm. Like, what did you think that what did I do to make you think that I would like this? Is Joe Rogan suggestions are like that? Is I don't feel them personally as much because they're just trying to constantly push Joe Rogan. But for a while, it's like if Joe Rogan or Jordan Peterson would pop up, it would be like I would feel personally offended, and it's like
I mean, I casually talk about Bucky's with my friend from Texas, Sheila, and one of my other buddies who's had experiences at Bucky's. That's like three people that I know who've been to Bucky's that I can talk to about and how it's like basically going to the worst version of Walmart. But I'm not sure why this is in my picks.
Until you even said it, every time you said Bucky's, the only thing I could like grasp onto is Bucky Barnes. I'm like, I don't have any other reference for Bucky's. Like, okay, Bucky Barnes.
Yeah,
Every
yeah.
time you said it, I don't have any. I'm like, oh, is it like a restaurant? I mean, and of course I could Google it, but I love those moments of like not knowing things because they don't happen often when people are like constantly inundated with information, especially some of it's false sometimes. So like I enjoy those moments of like, what is Bucky's?
Someday
I
you're
know
going to
I'm
be
gonna find
driving
out
you're
soon,
going to be
but
driving on the interstate at some point and you're going to see a sign for Bucky's. You're going to say, "Huh, is that what he was talking about?" And then you'll start to see it. And then you'll realize, "Wait a second. That's on the edge of the horizon." And about 5-10 minutes later, you'll get closer to it and you'll think, "Holy shit, it's the size of a Walmart." And you get even closer and you realize there are like 120, maybe 200 fuel pumps. And that's just the side that's visible from the interstate.
so there's a Walmart distribution center not too far from here, and it's like they built a new addition onto it, and it's like
All fuel
I
pumps.
I can only compare it to like airports or
Yeah.
I don't even know if there's like I've been to smaller airports than this distribution center where it's like it's so big and these facilities are so big where it's like
The mega
it
buckies that I've
doesn't even make sense.
driven, I've only stopped at one, but I've driven by a couple. The one that we went into had like two roundabouts after you got off the off ramp, and then it still had this whole kind of network of this is how you get to the fueling area. And then to get out of it was just as complicated because it was like a launching ramp where everyone gets in line and they all go. And if everyone's doing their thing and hits the roundabouts at the right time, nobody has any conflict and everyone just gets to keep driving. It's it's a very incredible experience because it doesn't feel like you're setting foot in a city or a town. It's a fueling station in between solar systems. It's like a spaceport. It's got all the things that you need for your cosmic voyage to the next location because you're not going to get out.
Have you seen Space Truckers?
I feel like that's the template for Han Solo and Chewbacca in a kind of a backwards way. Even though I'm pretty sure it came out afterwards. It's got like Steven Dorff and
Yeah,
Dennis
yeah,
Hopper in
yeah.
it. Oh,
It's like a underrated movie, or I guess like I don't know if it's just like I don't even know if it qualifies as a cult classic, but it's funny in that the idea of space truckers is kind of comedic but really that's like
That's what it's going to be.
what right, that's what most of our sci-fi is. They just don't paint them as space truckers most of the time. It's mostly like um the spice jumpers, like they're basically just truckers.
Yeah, well, that's why
They're
I
long haul
picked
truckers.
Han Solo and Chewbacca right out the gate, is because when we distill what they do down to its core, they basically have a box truck that is outfitted to smuggle shit across borders, and they can't get contracts with the state, the Empire, because they've crossed a few too many lines, and also the Empire doesn't really work with aliens because the Empire is xenophobic. Kind of sounds like America. That's not entirely true. There are plenty of truckers who came to America who didn't start in America. I see plenty of videos of dudes from like Eastern Bloc states that come here and they're like within 5 years are running these gigantic shipping companies. Well, regional shipping companies. I guess they're not that gigantic, but they're pretty big. Whenever I see pictures of border crossings down in in Texas, you always see these just insane lines of vehicles, and a lot of them are trucks. It's not even like big box trucks are like would be that fun to drive either, especially at border crossing. This just seems like a terrible thing to have to go through. And then then that person probably has to have a state contract, or any kind of transfer of goods would probably happen over on a rail line, which is undoubtedly more regulated.
Well, it's funny. I think we're seeing the end result of white flight in tandem with the automobile industry gutting public infrastructure and public transportation. Um, and it's hard to it's hard to pin down where the culprit is that is like the reason why we need so many truckers or why we have so many people on the road at the same time with truckers on the same roads, on the same highways, because our infrastructure is so poorly designed. And especially when
Oh, let's throw the
natural,
reality of housing, and that for a lot of people, affordable housing forces them to
oh
commute.
man.
Like,
Well, yeah, that okay. We won't get into the cause of that, but the fact that that exists, and then on top of that, infrastructure will start falling apart. So then it'll be under construction. So then that commute will then get extended, and those people have to sit in traffic for more time potentially than they may get with their family during a regular day. It's like a lot of people, especially when you get into the East Coast, people were spending more time in their commute than with their family every day. And it sounds like an exaggeration, but I know multiple people who would have short commutes, and then it would be 4 hours commuting, like when you count both ways each day. And then when you count sleep into that, they were only getting probably 2 to 3 hours with their family at most at most. If they cut out everything else and stayed up a little extra, maybe lost an hour of sleep, they would get 2 to 3 hours with their family every day. And that is so unhealthy for the idea of a community. And then those people moving further and further apart, and then working in places where they don't even have any connection. You have all these disconnected people living in commutes. Their lives are happening when they're commuting. And because you can't actually really do anything when you're commuting, if you're driving, then you get quote unquote tech innovation trying to reach around the head to scratch the nose and do full self-driving when we should have just had fucking trains. All we had to do was get trains, and then we wouldn't need, like, it's so amazing to have been able to take a train from Detroit to Chicago and not have to drive and not have to get on a plane and have it be in enough of a timely manner where it's not out of
Well, once you're in
it's not
Chicago, you don't need a
excessively
car. Anyone who needs a car
right.
in Chicago is staying in like the northwest suburbs or someplace really fancy. And
But I
even
don't need a
then,
car to get there
you don't need a
either.
car to get there, though.
That's but you can't do that from Indianapolis. Like
Oh,
you
well,
can't do that
you can
from
take a train to Chicago from Indy, but it sucks.
technically it's quicker to get on a bus to go to Chicago and then to take a train from Indianapolis, which is why it's like technically you can, but when the trains stop so frequently that it ends up taking longer because logistically they just stop every 20 minutes, it's not really viable when the bus ride is like half the price. So at that point, it becomes a luxury. And so when Detroit to Chicago is quicker by train than by car, it's not really a luxury. At that point, it's the most efficient form of transportation. And that's what I mean. I can make not using the car the most efficient form of transportation in ways that it's not just Indianapolis. There's other most places in America can't do it. It's just frustrating from Indianapolis that I would we were taking the train, and then after a while the bus started just running instead of the train because the bus would get there faster. And so it was like one of these things where it's not that I'm not I, I'm okay riding on a bus, but suddenly then you only have two toilets for everybody, whereas on a train it's like you have two toilets per car. And little things like access to a toilet and running water. I mean, the water in the bus bathroom is like it's 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 there. It's good enough, but riding on a train is just so much better as a passenger than riding on a bus, just logistically. So that's what I mean. Like,
I mean, just the smell alone is
yeah, good God.
no. I've only been on a few buses that had good enough ventilation that they didn't smell really weird by the end of a long ride, and they were usually like underpopulated. By underpopulated, I mean like each person had more room than they would if they had been the only person in a minivan.
Well, and a lot of times they'll have like a dark cloth fabric on the seats, so you don't know how dirty they're getting, and they definitely don't clean them that frequently. Whereas Amtrak cleans their shit pretty much at every stop. Or there's like, I was looking at it, they have, especially on the transcontinental trips, they have different crew layovers the same way a flight would, but or switchovers, but the the way that our train infrastructure exists just enough to be there, but compared to what not only what it used to be, what other countries have been able to do in the same amount of time, that's where the automobile lobby and oil lobby have then put us as people in this, we have this framework that we have to move in, and then we just kind of have to deal with it because we can't really lobby our government to invest in trains unless the oil companies and the automobile companies get into it. And we're at this weird point where like we kind of just have to sit back and watch these things happen. And I think that's also ironically what's driving these um student protests, because it's part of it. Like, you have a lot of these students that are saying like, hey, you're taking my money and spending it on something that I don't want you to spend it on. Don't spend it there. And the only thing they can really do is do these protests and ask their universities not to spend that money in these places. And that's, in being the only thing that they can do, it's such a challenge to the authoritative state that they brought in the fucking militarized police to crack down. And I think it's like, it's hard to fathom what's happening
Nationally,
because
it's happening nationally. There are
it's
colleges,
happening
universities across the freaking country where this is happening. It's insane. Like every day for the last week, it's like that's the one thing that I get to consistently read about. Like these, like colleges or universities are just having problems. Like University of I think it was Virginia, then the University of Michigan, IU here. I think there was some issues out in California with some protests. Like everywhere, the state is like stepping in and sending in the state police. It's crazy, and these are students. They're supposed to be allowed to be on these properties. Well, some of them
for
are.
sure.
Some of them are.
No, well, there's free speech zones and sit-ins are protected.
Yeah.
Sit-ins are protected form of free speech. So it's like when you do a peaceful sit-in, no matter how long you do it for, when people are like trying to then be like, oh, we need to get activities rolling, it's like, no, you're actually violating their right to protest if you try to move them, as long as they just are sitting in. And when you have right wingers trying to take away this form of protest, but then you have Democrats joining in because Democrats need to like have complicit ideas when it comes to this specific conflict because they're going into an election year, it's the absolute worst possible political strategy for them to side with the Republicans. And then further, when you have these students who didn't get a graduation because of COVID and then aren't getting a graduation because they want the universities who are legislatively bound to invest in military industrial genocide, they want them to stop doing that. And then the response is to roll out the military. All they're doing is radicalizing an entire generation of people. And it's not going to go away, to the point that the last time this happened, it was when Scott Walker there was a sit-in at Wisconsin, and the media tried to black it out and tried to make it seem like this fucking sit-in hadn't been going on for 2 weeks. And as soon as people realized that a sit-in had taken over the Wisconsin fucking state government house, that shit spread like a wildfire. And then we got Occupy Wall Street. And so the history of that got obscured by people like fucking Bill Maher, who came out and were ridiculing Occupy Wall Street, and then were actively agitating by trying to make it seem like Occupy Wall Street didn't have a point. And the end result was the destabilization of that movement. But that shit's not happening with this, because these kids are smarter, and these kids have seen the other failures in other protests, and they know when not to act out violently. They know when to use peaceful forms of barricading. They know how to not engage media. They know to mask up when people have cameras, and all these things that they've learned from seeing other failed protests, they're applying, and I see it happening, which is why
Oh, that
it's
didn't happen
only
in
gaining.
Bloomington. They weren't
What part?
they weren't masking up in Bloomington. They were.
I mean, at a certain point, the military or the militarized police were already out in Bloomington, so that by then it's like the masks don't matter. They got fucking snipers out. They had snipers out in Bloomington, so it don't matter if you're masked up because somebody might shoot you in the head at this point. So I get that one, but it's a matter of logistics in that these are people who are trying to use scare tactics to prevent this protest from spreading, like saying, oh, we'll make sure that people know who you are so you won't have any job prospects in the future. Well,
Yeah,
these
so
kids don't fucking care.
that's the
They
other
don't
thing.
care.
Like, that's one of those things that occurred to me. It's like they really must not care if they're on a watch list.
They don't. They
They
absolutely
really don't.
No, they
They're
don't.
not trying to get jobs in the existing private sector. They're going to find their own. They're going to find a different path that's not going to force them to compromise their principles. Also, good for them. I'm serious. Like, that's not easy.
The Gen Xers were lulled out of rebellion with the promise of cubicle jobs and mortgages. And a lot of them bought into it. And then they want to act like they don't want these kids to disrupt their shit because they have a little bit to hold on to and they have a little bit in their minds and they think that these kids are going to fucking destroy it because these kids never had that path to a mediocre retirement where you don't have to do much but can have enough to feel like you have something. And these kids never even had that prospect and they grew up knowing that. And the result is them not giving a fuck about going to grad. What the fuck do they care about graduation for when their money that they're paying their school for is going to killing children? Like that's how they feel.
Yeah.
That's why they're protesting. And for the response to be like, oh, let's shut this down with police, it's only further radicalizing them. So I think it's logistically, I've seen people start calling Democrats and Republicans the uniparty, and that I know in rhetoric, Democrats set themselves apart, but they don't do anything actually different. Like all this is happening under a Democratic president. So the idea that Joe Biden is siding with the fucking police going in, and we make no mistake, there's actually police forces that have said no at this point. Obviously the all cops are bastards. But in this case, there are police forces that are like, until these protesters do something that's actually dangerous, we're not going to go in and start kicking them off of fucking campus.
Yeah.
Just because you're not happy with what they're saying.
I mean, while I'm willing to believe that there are definitely a few already radicalized people on campuses who have, gone through the process of being accepted into a program. Like they've already been accepted as students, and they may already have like extreme views. I don't think that the propaganda mill has been presenting this idea that these protests are being infiltrated by outside forces that are going to, I don't know, do something, incite some kind of violence. Who knows? And that's the excuse for deploying freaking snipers.
I mean, they're the ones deploying the people. There's fucking IDF infiltrating. They're not even hiding it. There's like IDF people on Twitter, like posting videos of them infiltrating camps. It's like an IDF special forces guy. There's the one that I saw was bold enough to post a video of it. So it's like, they're like roaches, man. Like if you see somebody who's infiltrating camps, there's at least more because you saw the one. And I think that's where it's like, there's this element of, if you've been to a protest, when there's infiltrators and outside agitators because they come in looking like cops. And when I was in Turkey, the ones that infiltrated the protests were super obvious just because cops, real cops aren't tapped in, and they'll do shit that just sets them apart culturally. Like they'll tuck a t-shirt into some jeans or some shit, like where you're like, something's off about this guy. Or like they'll wear jeans and tuck the t-shirt in, but not wear a belt.
Well,
And it's
that's
little
just
shit.
fucked up.
Right, exactly. And it's little shit like that where they don't know how to
They
be
don't
a
know how
civilian
they don't know how to
correctly.
look American.
No, they don't know how to look civilian. They really don't. And the problem is because they're not military most of the time, they don't really know how to look military either, which is why they end up cosplaying fucking military against some goddamn college students. Like actual military people would never approach these college students gun drawn like that. Only some fucking cosplay military cops wanna murder some people with impunity type motherfuckers would approach some college students like this. And it's because I've seen it before. Main thing being the riot police in Turkey, when I don't think they ever brought the real guns to the times when shit was like hitting the fan. It was always like the non-lethal stuff. Because once you bring out the lethal weapons and shit's already escalated, it's only a matter of time before somebody misfires, which happened in one of these fucking college campuses. A police officer on Columbia campus fucking misfired their weapon, and when they went into one of these buildings, so a shot happened and they tried to hide it, and they hid it for a couple of days and it only came out a couple of days later. But that's why you'll see in places where they have to deal with this shit more often, they'll escalate it from the police side, but there's still this level of restraint where it's like they're not trying to come out and actually kill somebody. American cops want to kill somebody really bad because they are too.
And they probably should actually send in the military then, because the military has rules
Of
of
course,
engagement.
of course.
Like,
yes,
they're actually held
exactly.
up to like this.
It's way higher.
Convention.
It's a way higher standard, and that's what's so fucking crazy when you talk.
I can't believe
like,
I just said that,
bro.
God,
no, man, it's like when you talk to actual veterans who've been in combat, they are so.
They're appalled.
The ones who pay attention are very appalled with police behavior because they have to be held to a higher standard. When people are like in a combat zone, you can't raise your weapon until somebody's like raising their weapon at you. You can't do it or else you're violating the law. And they do that. They follow that shit to the point where, like I said, if you talk to actual combat veterans that pay attention, they're upset with the way cops are acting. And so that disparity is why I can look at these cops going in and trashing these fucking peaceful encampments and be like, oh, you just were too scared to actually sign up for the military, and you wanted to go into a forest where you could carry a gun and potentially shoot some people and wear your little fucking bulletproof vest and wear your goddamn flak helmet, so you were feeling protected. But these college kids, you're gonna go in there and rip off their mask. You can carry your fucking AK or whatever, the fucking M4, whatever stupid fucking weapon they carry, and then go in there and make these kids feel like they have authority. Meanwhile, these kids are standing up to the motherfuckers with guns. They're standing up. And so if we had a Kent State in 2024, like, bro, the campuses would shut down. There would be some staff would walk out and they'd be like, yeah, we're not coming back to campus until you guarantee that you're not going to send in armed police forces and we can guarantee the safety of our students. And that shit will spread. And I'm definitely not hoping that shit happens. It's only a matter of time when you have fucking cops with goddamn sniper rifles aimed at kids' heads before a sneeze or some shit happens and like, oops, I accidentally shot a goddamn white kid. And what's happening is they're doing this to white kids and white women professors, and the right wing is cheering them on because they don't like anybody. They don't like their own grandkids. They don't like their wives. They don't like their mothers. They don't like their sisters. And they'll use the police to fucking violate those people. They'll use the police to assault those people. They'll use murder by cop. Oh, kill him. I called and I was worried. No, they'll do that shit and then pretend that they didn't know what they were doing. Meanwhile, now that shit's happening to them. And so you can't create this fucking monster and not expect it to turn on you, thinking you got the collar on this fucking police force. This monster ass police force is willing to go in and fucking physically violate children. These are still children, man. I don't care if they're 19 and 20. These are children. These motherfucking armed cops going in willing to violate children like this on camera? Nah, bro, these are monsters. This is a poison. These are a polluted, just vile force that needs to be cut out like a cancer. And we have all the video evidence we need that all cops are bastards, and the ones who aren't doing this shit, they need to quit the police force and go work in the fucking NSA, and then go do a fucking investigation on all these other police forces. And we need to get rid of police. We need to do something else, because FBI and police aren't the same. NSA, FBI is not the same. NSA and police aren't the same. Police fucking suck.
And
Fuck
even
the
Homeland
police.
Security is different from NSA or FBI.
Nobody made a song called Fuck Homeland Security. So, you know what? As bad as TSA and Homeland Security is, I can't sing Fuck TSA. There's no song called Fuck TSA. So, there's no song called Fuck Homeland Security. I can sing Fuck the Police. Everybody can sing that shit. It's catchy as fuck. Fuck the police. Everybody knows that shit, and the police hate that shit. So when I see these fucking pigs violating children, it's only a matter of time before everybody's collectively singing, fuck the police. White people, fucking Muslims, Jewish people, black people. It's gonna be like the We Are the World chorus of fuck the police that nobody thought was gonna happen. Everybody, because of the way police have been moving since slavery, everybody thought these fucking euphemistic slave catchers would keep doing this shit forever. And we thought we were gonna have to live with these fucking slave catchers forever, running around, putting everybody in slavery because they wanted to smoke weed. Oh, you want to hit some weed? Slavery, but it's under a different name. And that's where the idea of white people now having to suffer this institutional modern slave system is going to be too much for white people to handle, because then they know they're not protected from it. There's this air of separation when this only happens to black people, or this only happens to Mexican people, or this only happens to Muslim people. I mean, obviously Muslim's not a race. Anybody who converts to Muslim or was born Muslim, this shit happens to them regardless of their race, which is why I say it like that. So when people start to see that and they're not one of those people, it's easy to be like, oh, that fucking sucks for them. That, you know, God, but what were they doing? What made the police attack them like that? And it's real easy to put the responsibility off on that person because they're not identifying. But once you see a white woman who's just holding their purse, asking the police, like, hey, stop brutalizing this other person, and then she gets body slammed, then suddenly white women are like, hey, what did she do? She didn't do anything. You can't do that. And then suddenly they get it. And I'm seeing a lot of Jewish people wake up to the fact that they may have never been to Israel. They may have never thought about Israel, but now they got to carry the weight of what Israel's doing. That's what it's like. That's a lot of what it's like to be black. Because then it's like when Will Smith slapped fucking Chris Rock, all black people, for whatever fucking reason, had to start answering for. We still got to answer for that shit.
Yeah, man.
Because
Why did he do that? God,
you know what I'm
that's
saying?
so
It's
fucked
like,
up.
bro, you would be surprised at how many black people have to deal with shit. Like, I thought Will Smith was one of the good ones, and then have to like go through that conversation, not getting angry that somebody's trying to like paint Will Smith out to be this model black person, and then anybody outside of that model black person, including Will Smith, then is like not one of the good ones. And that's just the modern day way of bourgeoisie people saying the N-word without feeling bad. The way Louis C.K. put that, when somebody says the N-word, it forces the other person to say it in their head. It's like the good ones is like the bourgeoisie way of saying that, and them not even feeling like they said it because they can recognize the difference. And so knowing that, because even it happens even in like black bourgeoisie, which is why black people started getting called bougie. And I think it's funny that term emerged in like a black community or in like African American vernacular English. White people never really got what bougie meant, because I think by the time they understood, or by the time it made it to them, it had like transcended the negative connotations and people were like using it in good and bad. So it's like really hard. I think it's really difficult for white people to like understand what's happening in black culture if they don't grow up in it, which is why you get these like Eminem type people who grow up in it and don't misunderstand the things and make themselves look stupid by putting out something that's like a clear misunderstanding. Because, okay, for perfect example, in this recent, oh man, if somebody's trying to say that you're being materialistic, the response to that is not to like flash jewelry. And so when I see these types of, there are things happening culturally that can be commodified. And I know as a Chinese American person, there's some shit that probably just burns you up. Like when you see like bastardized Chinese food that like somebody thinks is like a real representation of your culture. Like, I don't know if that's the one. I know how much you love food. And I know when I see some like bad soul food and people are like trying to like talk it up, that shit like burns my soul, where I'm like, who the fuck do these people think they are, taking this dish and gentrifying it? Like, how you gonna gentrify fucking collard greens? So like, I don't know what it is for you, but I know there's some shit that when you see people taking that part of your culture and like gentrifying it and like then keeping actual Chinese people out of it, because that's one of the parts of it that makes it inauthentic, is like they'll take something and appropriate it and then like try to cut other people out of it. And so that's where I'm like, you see these reclamations happening, and
Well,
I think,
the one that
sorry,
gets
go ahead.
me is when I go to it's only happened a couple times, and it really only happened like maybe a decade ago. There was a period where the noodle and sushi place started to emerge, and they would pop up, and it's one thing when it's very distinctly like a Hong Kong style noodle joint. and they just happen to have some sushi. But every so often you encounter one where it's like uh, Japanese noodles and Korean sushi. Just like a weird mismatch of what's going on. Like when did they decide on this one? And I guess that's not really a big deal. It doesn't really bother me. It's just kind of like, huh, what kind of restaurant is this? Can't make up their mind. But maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe it's like fast food at that point. Like I don't really have a problem going to when the McRib is happening. I don't complain that it's not authentic barbecue. I just know that I'm going to pay the price for it in about 8 to 12 hours. And I still eat it.
I mean, but
Oh, but I have no
you don't
illusions that
have
it's
like
good.
you don't have like a cultural attachment to barbecue though, or like American barbecue because they're doing American. But if it's like okay,
I don't
if
pretend that
one
it's good barbecue is the other thing. I think
if
that like for me, like if I go to a place that pretends to have an authentic Chinese or traditional Chinese menu and they don't meet my expectations, I just assume that it's like a regional Chinese culinary thing that's expressing itself, and I'm just not familiar with it. But it does bother me when I go to a Chinese restaurant and it's like the most Americanized version of Chinese food, and it's not even spicy, just sweet as can be. That actually does bother me.
like it doesn't bother you that for let's say okay, let me give them some credit, and I'll say a low estimate of maybe 25% of Americans' first introduction to Chinese food is Szechuan sauce from McDonald's. That don't make you a little bit mad?
I
You know what
mean,
I'm saying? Like that's they took your culture and turned it into a sauce that they discontinued because not enough people liked it. That until Rick and Morty fucking referenced it, they're gonna like just lock this one away.
they tried to take away my hot mustard too, and they did it successfully for about 3 years. And then the people who wanted hot mustard sauce with their chicken nuggets were just asking, "Hey, where's the hot mustard? Where's the hot mustard?" And it only took 3 years to get hot mustard back. So the fact that it took a whole ass cartoon show to spur of movement to get the Szechuan sauce back, I McDonald's just needs to learn that they should just not discontinue things. Bastards.
Well, okay, and here's another
But I also don't
perfect.
think of that stuff as Szechuan sauce. It's just like it's like a
Of course,
name,
it's not. It's not. It's not.
just a
Of course,
weird
it's not.
name.
Of course it's not. They just took the name and slapped it on some fucking sugar and put some coloring in it and called it Szechuan sauce. That's all.
It's
Um,
like barbecue sauce mixed with some red hot sauce.
so once I realized, I mean, I didn't realize it. Once I read the article that highlighted the fact that the Thai government had directly had a hand in the proliferation of Thai restaurants as to why they are all of a certain standard. Now, when I see a Thai restaurant, I'm like, oh fuck, this is like certified.
Oh
You
yeah,
know
no.
what I
So
mean?
so back in like the 50s and 60s, there was an actual network. It was a Chinese state supported or state sponsored uh, Chinese food restaurateur network for Chinese Americans who came to America to start their Chinese restaurants, and that's why a significant number of them are very similar, and that's also why every college town you go to that has a Dragon Express that all looks the same. They have the same shellacked food images, the same weird like greasy smell, because they're getting all that stuff from the same state supplier of Chinese state restaurants. I mean, they might pretend, and they might have the paperwork to say that, oh yeah, this is private enterprise because it's going through Western banks. But you know, China wasn't exactly allowing just anyone to take their money out of China 50, 60, 70 years ago. It was all state sponsored. A few people could probably get away if they were like, in Hong Kong or Taiwan, Macau maybe. They might have been able to get out. That's just expensive though. I think that's
Well, and the only
also the
reason,
reason that there was so much homogenization of American style Chinese cuisine. Like everywhere you go, the same kind of quality of Americanized Chinese food existed. And occasionally, um, it was only, and it really only happened when we would go out as a family, like my parents and I. Sometimes they would bring out the traditional menu, and it was in Chinese. But I remember going to the same places with, you know, my friends and their parents, and they would never offer up the Chinese menu. So who
well,
knows?
yeah, I don't know what happened, but it's only in the last probably, I want to say maybe 5 years that I've started seeing the like they've been offering me. I don't think it's like just me, but they've been offering the like Americanized menu and then the authentic menu where it's like,
Yeah, that's become more common. I've
yeah,
noticed that too. I
uh,
mean, I remember, you know, when I was a teenager, uh, occasionally somebody would bring out the Chinese menu, and my mom would go, "Ooh, look at this," and we would get something from it, and that was always really cool. But it was like only certain restaurants, and it wasn't even like a consistent thing. Now it's a lot more common to have a traditional menu option. In fact, I think that's the standard. But I think that was all. That's like kind of a reflection of cuisine in China. The restaurants all can essentially make the same things, but each one has their own specialty, like the family specialty version of fried fish, or their special version of roast chicken, where they bury it in salt in a clay pot that's like in molten hot salt, and it just cooks through the pot. Weird shit. Methodology that would not fly uh, or in America. But they figured it out. That stuff's really cool, but it's not. It wasn't common 20 years ago. I think as like various Asian diaspora continue to develop in America, we've seen like not just like greater diversity of food, of course, but like a greater improvement in quality across the board. So in the past, there might be a place that does Vietnamese style sandwiches and noodles, but it it was only good if you really didn't know what you were doing. If you've never had pho before, then you might not recognize that this is out of a can, and those noodles were sitting on a shelf for the last 5 to 10 years, waiting to be shipped from Southeast Asia. And then now we've got like pho and what is it? What are those sandwiches called?
banh mi.
Yeah, banh
Yeah,
mi.
that shit's amazing.
Yeah,
It, well, what's great is I never even knew that they existed until I was like actually in a place that had a large Vietnamese population,
yeah.
and like I was like, I guess I never tried Vietnamese food before, and then tried it, and I think I went back and got another one immediately, and it was like I was on a banh mi kick for a while where
I mean, it's
you
hard
can't really find them.
it's hard to imagine a baguette that retains all of the baguette qualities in a tropical environment, but that's what banh mi buns or bread does. It's like extremely climate stable. And it doesn't dry out in America despite being in a less humid environment, which I think is impressive as can be. Also, banh mi has like one of the craziest assortment of toppings, like toppings that I never would have thought to put on sandwiches, like
Right.
carrots and cucumbers, like shaved cucumber, and that does go on a sandwich in the form of a pickle.
Right, but then they have like pickled radicchio or something,
Yeah,
right?
like weird pickled Southeast Asian vegetables that we can't even really pronounce the name to because it's some weird, yeah, relative of a radish or a daikon, but we don't know what it is. Yeah, I remember the first banh mi I had. It had um, it was a cured pork sandwich. It had carrots and some weird pickled vegetable. It was delicious.
Oh, you know what it is? Okay, this is what. Okay, they use also cilantro on the sandwich,
Yeah,
and
instead of lettuce.
well, I don't know if you've ever taken that genetic test to see if you're not like cilantro tastes like soap to me. But the first time I had a banh mi sandwich, I was like, oh, I fucking get it. Finally, it was. I didn't understand cilantro because it always smelled and tasted like soap until I had it in that form. And that's where I'm like, it was crazy for me. It's one of those times where I'm like, if you
Now I can like eat
could taste
cilantro raw.
color,
Like I can take a bunch of it and just start chewing on it. It's like that's no
oh
problem for
no,
me.
God, no, 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 no,
I think that's
no. That's
like my 50% Asian is kicking in. It's like I'm genetically predisposed to be able to just like chew on cilantro.
no, no, no. It's just that's that just sounds like
Like punishment.
vomit inducing. Yeah. But again, if it's in a banh mi sandwich for whatever reason it works. But it still smells like soap. But or on its own, but in that
Yeah.
sandwich it doesn't. Like
Yeah,
so I don't
I've met people who have had that kind of experience before, and generally all I think is like, oh, no problem, more cilantro for TN. But I get it. Like, I've seen some really strong reactions when people didn't know that there was cilantro in their food, and then they take a bite and like, and they start like wiping their tongue off because it can be, I don't know, probably really an intense experience if it does the soap kick thing for you.
washing your mouth out with soap was like a full-on cultural punishment.
Yeah.
So that's where something that tastes and smells like soap is again, yeah, to me, that it just sounds like punishment. But I didn't when I eat food like that where it's like the first time I won't get it taken off because it also
It might balance with whatever other weird stuff's in there.
um like actual street tacos will use cilantro
Yeah.
and like once I found some good street taco places, that's when I'm like, okay, I can fuck with their cilantro usage as well.
Yeah, I like the traditional taco style of like the carnitas with the radish and some cilantro and some lime. And if when
I
it's
was just about to say, I think it might be the lime
yeah,
that, with the cilantro.
when it all comes together just right, I don't add any hot sauce. I just want that like that roast pork, and then the radish kind of has that palate cleansing effect. I'm not even sure what the cilantro and the lime is doing at that point because it's just bringing out this fantastic pork flavor. I also really appreciate shrimp and fish tacos because that's just like a unique experience when you get some like Caribbean style seasoned fish or shrimp. That stuff's fantastic. I've only experienced that stuff once. Um, Man, that's the stuff. I'd love to live in a tropical environment where I could eat fish and cook fish like that regularly. I'm not sure what I would have to do to be there, but yeah, in a place where the water is just so blue, you can see like everywhere you step. That was great. In Playa del Carmen for a wedding. Absolutely, absolute paradise. I'm pretty sure that kind of environment's not going to exist in like 30 years. Or it'll just move north. That's like assuming the waters around it don't get completely fucked by everything. So on the kind of on the direction of the ocean, I was reading about this hole that forms in the sea ice every year above this mountain range that's under the water, and the shape of this mountain creates this like salt vortex that thaws and melts the ice in this one spot, and it's about the size of like Massachusetts. So it's not a small hole. It's a pretty big hole that forms every year, but this year it's bigger, and it's been forming more consistently every year for the last several years now. And it's formed in it's happened consistently enough that now scientists are pretty sure what happens, like almost positive how it's the conditions under which it expresses itself. And so what it means is that it's dumping more cold water into circulation, and that could be good, but that could also be bad. It alters the amount of oxygen that the ocean can store. It alters the way that the ocean absorbs uh, other gases in the atmosphere, raises sea levels. Apparently, like I think it's the article said like 40% of um, the ocean's the temperature regulation is all Antarctica, and then the rest is distributed around the rest of the planet. But like that big block of ice down there is kind of our primary temperature regulation system. So maybe this is supposed to happen. It's supposed to melt more to stabilize the temperature. But it seems like all that's really happening is causing really crazy weather around the equator.
Well, and it was a fairly mild winter in where we are.
Yeah.
So I feel like when that happens, it's the indicator that it could be extremely hot, but if that cold water is like circulating, it keep it from going extreme. So we may be seeing the earth like balancing itself out in real time
Yeah.
in ways that we didn't expect. And not to say that we should continue down this path, but I always like was of the mind that the earth would like fix itself before we destroyed it. Whereas like we can make it inhospitable for humans and a lot of other life, but the earth isn't gonna die at our hands. But before it kills us off, um, but I feel again, if you got the Saudis going green, America has only a short amount of time before they have to go green too. And that's why they're all so mad that they got to get rid of their fucking stupid like coal rolling trucks here soon. Because it's like, yeah, you can't just like destroy the planet for fun anymore.
Oh,
We
yeah.
had that period, and you can't do that shit anymore.
It'll actually be pretty nice when people who want to have a giant diesel truck actually have to have like a DOT license and prove that they have a business that requires that they have a vehicle that has those capabilities. Because once that vehicle is tied to a business model, they're not going to be doing dumb shit like rolling coal and burning the rings out of the engines. Good for them, though. I mean, the Saudis for like, taking steps towards a greener future.
I mean, and on that note, it's like if you have um hauling companies looking to go electric, we've already started that
Yeah.
transition where like the shipping companies don't care about internal combustion. They just need their shit there.
Yeah.
And if there's any sort of benefit that can be offered by electric vehicles, whether it's like longer hauls without stopping or cost cutting, like whenever one of those two things happens, you're gonna see a lot more switch
Yeah.
to
Once
electric.
the
And it's already starting.
once the threshold, the barriers to entry are below the point of diminishing returns, then that's when that will happen overnight. Once it's like when the startup is able to go in and go electric cheaper than buying a used vehicle, even if that's a doomed model, then that's when it's going to happen. And by doomed model, I mean like buying a used vehicle that's going to require untold amounts of maintenance because they don't actually know what's going on with it. And I think that's one of those. That's just people being afraid because what they're comfortable with might disappear, even though what they're comfortable with is something that's not good, that is unsustainable. But I think you're right. There has to be like a kind of a reconciliation of why do we need so many shipping companies? Why are there so many? Why do we have to have so many vehicles on the road at every moment? There has to be a better way to organize and distribute this stuff. It's like the distribution model was built around like what we had at the time, and it wasn't really designed to scale to what we have now. Our infrastructure actually was never designed to scale. It was only really designed to handle a certain volume.
Yeah, and in that volume, it was like the 1950s.
Well, some of those interstate projects have been resolving. Like I-69, that took like a million years to resolve, and it's not done. It's still
Mm.
happening. I'm pretty sure that the interstate standards have changed over the years so that more modern interstates are better equipped than the really ancient ones that have been serviced less. But even then, all of these things have been built around really old standards for what vehicles are. I mean, the vehicles also have been getting bigger and bigger and bigger for the last 20 years, and the roads don't last longer. They last less longer. Is like affluence part of the problem? Like we want to have really nice things, but the really nice things can only really exist in concentrated areas of wealth. And those concentrated areas of wealth then will inevitably gentrify, which forces the people who need to live in those areas to provide the services to those areas out of those areas. And it forces them outside of those areas, which alters the dynamic of their work life balance such that quality of life will always diminish the further they get away from where they work because they have to spend more time getting to and from and away from where they should be.
That's why micro communities are better than megalopolises.
But
Or
then
megalopol.
but
Yeah,
then the micro community can't have all of the super niceties of the megalopolis.
but those things are one pro for 75,000 cons because that's the issue is like, yeah,
I'm not arguing for like the super affluent shit to, be the reason the cities even exist. I'm just saying they do exist. And I think that's the
no, for
problem.
sure. But I mean, like, for example, yeah, you don't have 700 options to go out to on a Friday night like they do in cities of 10 million or more people, but you also don't have to deal with the traffic of
Yeah.
10 million people. And you don't have to deal with the insurance costs that go along with living in a city with 10 million people
Yeah.
and the electricity costs and the utility costs and all those other things that then effectively, unless like you're saying, unless you're in the hyper elite, you can't actually take advantage of those um niceties. So it's only like you can see them, you can be in proximity to them, but
You might be able to participate in the most trimmed down, uh, optioned de-optioned version of that affluent experience.
So what you're talking about is why I went to the fucking driving range as frequently as possible, because very rarely in my life will I be that close to a golf course or a driving range to the point where I can just pop over and go do it. And the people that do live that close don't do that. So that's why I'm like, I'm going to enjoy this part of this access that people will literally pay hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars to get and then not use.
Yeah,
And so it's those types of things where it's like you see people who get pools and then don't swim. And then,
that's just sad.
I mean, but that's most of them. That's most of them. Or get fucking sports cars and don't drive them fast. Or don't, because it's not even not driving fast. They don't go driving fast on a track, because driving fast not on a track is too risky where you might die. So it's not a good thing to take a sports a hypercar onto a road that's not fit for hypercars and try to test it out, because then you might die.
Yeah.
Whereas if you go onto a speedway where there's not even a remote goddamn pothole, yeah, then you can test out your hypercar. But that's like those two things. Like
I just think
that's just
I
an
just want to
example.
clarify, like we're not talking about Miatas and Mustangs and Camaros or even entry level Corvettes. We're talking about track cars and hypercars and supercars and cars with built engines and extra shit.
Even the entry level Corvette now, it's like the way the 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 acceleration that those can get and then the top speed that they can get, when you see people driving them around on like 30-mile-an-hour roads, it just looks stupid. It just looks dumb. It looks fucking dumb.
the
And I
problem
think
the
that's
problem with supercars when there's on public roads is that they normally look fast even when they're sitting still, but when they're traveling at like regular speeds, like like you said, 30 miles an hour, they look like they're not moving at all, and then they look like they're sad and depressed. Like, why am I even here? You're not supposed to see supercars around like work trucks, utility vehicles, and commuter cars. They just look out of place. Like a person wearing a fancy outfit to go to Kroger. At least with the big trucks, we know that it's like a cosplay cowboy thing. I'm not sure what to think about the person who drives their Corvette to go to get milk and popcorn. Actually, I know exactly what to think. It's the same thing I think when I see somebody with a jacked up truck going to the mall and it looks like it's never seen dirt before.
yes, those are the same people, just different preferences. The
One wants to
exact same
climb into
people.
their car and one wants to climb out of their car.
Or when somebody's taking a lifted truck to go grocery shopping, and
I,
that's all they ever take it to do.
man, like, okay, it's okay if they take their lifted truck to Sam's Club to buy a pallet of toilet paper. I'm totally okay with that. Like a whole ass pallet. That's fine if they're planning like that. I think that's also the at the crux of the issue is that as people are forced to find residence further away from where they work because there's no housing or no affordable housing, they're forced to lock into long-term car payments for vehicles that may only last like 3 or 4 or 5 years before they need some really critical maintenance that causes them to consider, do I just get out and get another car and get in under another loan, or do I fix this thing and tempt fate? And most people aren't mechanics, so they're not going to fix it. Like that, there's a whole last generation of Ford Fusion cars. Apparently, they eat their transmissions, and the transmissions are worth more than the cars now.
Damn.
Like the entire, like the ones that look cool, that kind of look like the modern Mustang, but with four doors and not quite big like a Taurus. Those things apparently are eating their own transmissions because the guidance for how to care for them was insufficient, and the guidance was for the person who drives it like a an old person, not a person who's commuting to work every day. Which explains why there are very few of those Ford Fusions on the market ever. There's a lot of cars actually I've as I've been reading about modern the cars made in the last decade. There's a lot of them that are having a lot of weird issues that are inconsistent with like all the claims of material advancements and um, parts that are have greater thermal tolerances or able to dissipate heat better. A lot of this stuff is not living up to the marketing, and so it looks like we traded the automotive market for a bunch of SUVs, and they're more expensive to purchase and maintain and to operate.
And they're
And,
heavier, so
and
it
they're
destroys
heavier.
the roads quicker.
All the vehicles destroyed the road faster than they ever did before. And a lot of it's in the name of safety because they got to put in, all the safety measures, all the airbags, all the restraint stuff, all the crumple zones, and that requires more space. And so vehicles getting bigger makes sense because we want people to be safer, but we also want the vehicles to last longer. I think the disconnect, at least for me, is that um, vehicles shouldn't be changed out every few years. Like, I think the whole like leasing of vehicles is part of the culture that treats vehicles as disposable when they should be treated more like a like when someone buys a refrigerator or a washing machine or laundry machines. Like those are investments in their home, and those things are generally expected to last like a decade or longer. Like someone buys a toilet, they expect that porcelain throne to last a good 20 to 30 years, 40 years. They might have to change out a few things here or there, but nobody's buying a porcelain throne
Okay.
expecting to replace it in 2 to 3 years. Vehicles should be designed to be maintained so that they can last almost indefinitely, but that's not the case.
Well, and I think people don't they don't learn that they need to do simple maintenance, and then that simple maintenance can like go a long way where um like the brakes, the fucking oil, like there's certain things where just paying attention to them enough, you don't even have to like overcheck. You just be like, oh shit, are my brakes squeaking? I should probably get the pads checked. And then it's like, as long as you do little, just even the littlest shit, like, oh, it's been a couple of weeks. Maybe I need to check the oil if you don't have like an oil light that comes on. Shit
And
like that.
so my dad's Miata, the brake light came on, and we added some brake fluid to it. It needs pads, but we added brake fluid to it, and now it's behaving normally. Um, his other Mazda, I think all we do is check the fluid levels and keep the fluid levels topped off. Same thing with my Mazda. That's it. I don't have any problems because I'm not driving it like a maniac and flooring it from stoplight to stoplight, and I'm not standing on the brakes to stop at the last minute. Basically, I'm driving it like an old person. But um, I think it is actually possible. Yeah, I think you're right. I think it is actually possible for these things to last a long time. They just have to be maintained. But even then, the culture of owning vehicles for a long time, and it's the same group of people that trade their phones in every couple of years. I'm still impressed by the people who like trade their phone in every year, like because they got to have the most advanced computer phone. That's like a that's a lot. That's like $1,000 a year habit.
Well, and then they don't understand the benefit of having a good phone that lasts multiple cycles. Because I like did a lot of research, and I was like, I want to have this phone like as long as humanly possible.
Yeah.
And when I got this last phone, I'm like, I'm doing research on what has the strongest glass because I don't want to fucking drop it and then have a crack in it and then have to have that crack until I get another phone and then do that shit all over again. So I like did a lot of research on like Gorilla Glass and which one has the newest Gorilla Glass. And like lo and behold, this phone I bought it in 2018, I believe. Um I haven't, had to even think about buying a new phone. It's still the nothing has slowed down. Maybe even was it 2017 even? Um
Like my phone's the 2020 iPhone SE, and I haven't. I'm not worried about it because I know that they're going to do what they always do and find some way to make it slow down and force me into buying an upgraded device.
I'm sorry, it's 2020. That even still, this is like a 4-year-old phone now.
Yeah, I think the only reason I upgraded from my previous phone, which was in from 2016, is because in 2020 they decided it's like, oh, we're going to discontinue support for it. But you know what? It's running our Zoom session right now, and it runs great. That's right. We run our Zoom session off of an old iPhone because Zoom is really lightweight, like extremely lightweight. Sometimes I wonder how much, you know, how much processing power do these phones actually need? Because at some point they're essentially just miniature tablets, and some tablets are extremely powerful, like borderline ultrabooks with missing their keyboards.
Excuse me. I feel like nobody really needs anything more than enough power to play videos. It's their habits of tab hoarding that's causing people to need a shitload of RAM and processing power.
Like it's 32 gigabytes of RAM in a phone.
But now the browsers are starting to build in features so like tab hoarding isn't even as much of a problem. So I think that's where like that behavior was clearly a problem with users and eventually like they caught up to it.
I mean, I know that can't remember the name of there's a phone company that makes an Android gaming device that has a headset so that it can transform into a VR system, and it's also designed to integrate into into your TV. I can't find it now, but I remember looking at this thing because it's overpowered and it has like a 4K display in a phone. That's what the Pimax Portal. Yeah, this thing's crazy. It has these like magnetized gaming controllers that you attach to the side, and you can clip it into your headset, and then all sorts of crazy stuff. But it's got like all the features, and it's stupid powerful because it's supposed to be like the screen for a VR headset, but it's also a phone and a gaming computer. Like that just seems like crazy to me. But it's also I get it. There's somebody out there who wants their phone to be their gaming machine and they want it to do VR. That's cool. And it has like 5 cameras, so it can do all this self localization stuff. I get that. But that's like somebody who wants to have a really serious VR system that they can take anywhere they want. I think that's different than like the person who just needs their phone to phone and play videos and music.
And it's like if someone made a device that had those two things separated out, it would look ridiculous. But because those are the main things people use their devices for, they think that when their machine gets bogged down because they're trying to do both, that they need to get a new machine instead of just like
Optimizing it to
not
do the one thing really well when they're doing the one thing.
right. Yeah. Or not trying to quote unquote multitask on the same machine at the same time and make it try to like do background stuff between like you can't treat tabs like channels on a TV,
Yeah.
but I think that's exactly how people treat it, not realizing that their machine has like memory that it's like storing shit in, and if you don't take something out of the memory, it's gonna just keep adding and adding and adding, and eventually your machine is just gonna slow to a fucking grinding halt, and it'll be like, what's happening? What when did machine stop working? And it's like, no, you just like overloaded the memory, and that's like 95% of machines becoming obsolete unless it's actually like Apple stepping in and making the machine slow down on purpose, which definitely happens, you know.
So I did get a payout from that. They
Nice.
sent me like $116 because I owned three devices. I've owned three Apple devices over the years that were affected. iPhone 3GS, the 4S, and the SE, the first SE. So I had three of them. They gave me $116. I wish that could be the equivalent of like giving a pat on the back and thumbs up, but that's just like it's not. Not to mention like over the years, all of the apps that they've just dropped support for or removed from the marketplace or their app store because whatever reason, like stuff that I've paid for doesn't exist anymore. And there's only a few companies that made anything cool that when it was dropped from their app store, you could still get it on devices if it was part of your purchased apps list. And incidentally, so the one version, the title I'm speaking of is Rebirth for iPad. And when I got it, it worked okay. And now that I have a newer iPad, it works great. Like, man, this is really snappy. Is it really just the addition of an extra core and double the RAM and a better GPU? Obviously, the answer is yes. But I think that's actually the real complaint that I have about the direction that like Apple's products have all gone. Like, granted, phones are very rarely upgradable. Um, Sometimes we're lucky and we get to add extra storage to them, but like Apple computers in general have gone on down the path of like, no, you can't even add RAM. We don't even include a space for additional storage unless you want to use an SD card. If you open up the case to this thing, you void the warranty on it, that kind of stuff. So somebody has to wait for 3 years before they can crack the case open, and by then, like, they probably would have already bought a new machine if they actually thought they needed one, because they're willing to pay the Apple tax. So lately, actually, because Windows 10 support is ending in like I think like August or something next year. Maybe it's October of 20. I think it's August of 2025. Um, I've been looking into various Linux distributions because I have computers that I'm not interested in getting rid of because they're not slow. There's nothing actually wrong with them other than they can't run Windows 11. And my dad says that he thinks that Microsoft will come around and they'll offer some kind of like solution because they're going to provide security updates for enterprise. And that means that there's going to be development for security patches. And they say they're going to charge money for it, but he's communicated to me that it's like he thinks they'll come around because they don't want to draw the ire of an embedded user base like that. But at the same time, it's possible to go out and spend less than $400 and get a computer that is, just completely incredibly overpowered compared to some of the 10-year-old computers that we've got laying around that run just fine and feel snappy as can be. Like they just have the ability to run instruction sets that old processors don't. And their RAM is literally 2 to sometimes 3 times faster. Sometimes even faster than that. And so, at least to me, like I don't have any concerns about finding modern computers because they're affordable. Powerful computers have never been more affordable. But at the same time, I don't want to just throw away a perfectly good computer because I don't know, I don't think that they're actually disposable. I know that the consumer culture has made a lot of things disposable, but when it's not broken, like, why do we have to get rid of things that aren't broken?
The idea of trading up is so ingrained. It's so weird. It's like people want to trade up cars, their houses, their women or their partners or like whatever. And it's like that is something that is constantly, they used to make it be like frame it like keeping up with the Joneses, but like now I think it's just,
Keeping up with the Joneses has gone out of hand.
I mean, it's not even, there's no Joneses anymore. It's just the notion of the constant trade up, the constant like, what can I go take and pawn away and then buy something better? And that they do that with jobs, they do it with, friendships. Um, I think there's just this weird lack of content, like being content that gets ingrained with people where the the notion of the grass always being greener on the other side, it's like people got the wrong interpretation and were like, well, I need to go on the other side of that fence then because the grass is greener over there. Instead of like either tending to their own garden or realizing it was just the shade that made their grass look darker. And it's like that notion of not being able to ever see your own situation as being good enough. It's
That sounds like
it's
mental
like a
illness.
it is it's like an affliction. I don't even know. I don't know if it's like emotionally. I doubt it's emotional. It feels like a culturally constructed affliction as to why, if there's a difference between something internal and external, one is like emotionally uh originate like or originates in emotions and the other one originates in social constructs. Like this completely originates in social constructs, and that's where it feels like people who are unable to get out of that materialistic construct have this weird it's like a mental ceiling, and I feel like that's why talking to those kinds of people feels like you're talking to someone with a stunted intelligence or a stunted view of the world, but it's because their their view of the world is limited by materials, and there's like a literal ceiling on their perspective.
Sometimes I think about how fortunate we are in this country to be able to just go to a grocery store and buy fresh produce. And not just that, but we can have like vegetables that are out of season in our region, but are totally growing somewhere else. Oranges, avocados, asparagus. Get a bag of almonds, and that bag consumes enough water for a village in a developing country, like for like a month, maybe 2 months. I remember seeing something a while back about how like the average American uses the shower enough, or every year uses the shower every year to the point that it's like uh, almost as much water is consumed by raising one beef cow or something like that. Our society just consumes things.
Yeah. And I feel like that there's this well, there used to be a mindless consumption that could fill that void that was created by someone having that mental ceiling. And because goods were cheap enough, activities were cheap enough, and entertainment was cheap enough that people could keep themselves preoccupied with it, they never really worried about achieving any higher mental planes. And like, then you would see things where people would like have DVD collections and they'd watch all these DVDs and not get any fucking higher understanding from anything. Like they wouldn't take in the lessons. It's just these movies exist as movies, as if the people who made them weren't trying to make points and were only trying to make art for people to feel, but not to grow. Like you're only supposed to feel, but you're not supposed to take that feeling and grow as a human being, learning something along the way. And those people, I think, once it's not even just about digitization, but once it became like you can't you can't like lean on those collections as a personality anymore, whether it's comic books or DVDs. Once once collecting ceased being enough to sustain a personality, then the gatekeeping started kicking in even harder because they thought they could just double down and like get all of the get control over their culture enough to get isolated out and just hold on to it. Because then you see that shit with like you see it with Warhammer, you see it with Star Wars, you see it with um, just comic books in general, with video games in general, specific types of video games. Um, People will try to latch onto it and create that as their identity, and then eventually they're made to realize that they don't have any control over that thing, and making that thing their identity is not viable long term. And it's funny to see things in real time when they get undermined. Like I don't know if you saw when Alan Richson wore like uh arrest the or he made a post or something about arrest the cops that killed Breonna Taylor. And he was wearing like a Black Lives Matter shirt or something. And then all of a sudden, the right wing people who thought Reacher was like a right wing character suddenly turned on Alan Ritchson and the Reacher thing. Well, I'm gonna boycott the. I'm never gonna watch Reacher again. But it was funny to see in real time that they thought they could just come in and make this thing their part of their identity, but then they immediately have to shed it because they don't actually want this part. They don't want the part like what's funny about.
Wait, didn't they? Did they not? Did they miss the part where Reacher like consistently beats the ever living snot out of corrupt cops?
Oh yeah, they completely
They
missed
they
that.
forgot that part.
They conveniently overlooked it, but then what happens is if you only go based on the TV shows, you're gonna miss that in the Reacher books, a lot of the villains are like white people, American white people specifically, and then the way Lee Child describes them is not endearing. He's like making them villains and then painting them in this light like David Lynch did, where if you just look at it and don't actually analyze it, you'll just think, oh, it's being innocuous. But then you'll realize, like, oh, they're being like called terrible people. Like in Twin Peaks, I don't know how much of that you've seen or if you've seen any of it, but if you just look at it and don't analyze what's happening, it just looks as if we're observing a town and there happens to be this murder and there's some other shit happening, but it's like if you don't look too close, the veneer of normalcy tricks you into thinking that it's not as dark as it is. And I think that's the it's like Reacher for television takes those elements and tones them down from the book, but they're still there. Down, even down to like, you get a variety of types of people. The stories are not trying to make, going back to earlier, the stories are not trying to make any race responsible for the actions of any individual within that race. However, in constructing a certain narrative, you can highlight certain parts of that culture. For example, Reacher's obsessed with blues and he'll like travel around the country just to find blues like history and blues musicians and like listen to stories. And almost all of these people he's looking up happen to be black. And he'll end up in like a black barber shop or talking to a black blues musician. And these people are explicitly black in the stories. So there's something about the way Lee Child is framing black people and there's something about the way Lee Child is framing white people that in the TV shows, it kind of gets corporatized out because Amazon isn't trying to put those things, I think, on the forefront of the show, but they're still there. And so knowing that's one of the reasons I got like started getting into the books in the first place was I had the feeling that it's meant to appear one way, but if you actually look at it, it's something completely different. And these right wing people looked at it and thought it was this one thing until Alan Ritchson just made it clear, like, hey, I'm not a right winger. I don't know why you would think you would assume Reacher's going to be a right winger. He's like not any winger. He's like apolitical in his attempts to shoulder justice
Yeah,
where
he
happens to
delivers
be.
justice. Justice is
Only where
blind.
he can be.
Yeah,
He can only deliver it where he in his proximity, and that's all he cares about.
yeah, and I I I like the character of Reacher Although I I don't know, the stories are being delivered in a very, serial kind of like here's today's meal kind of way. And so I still have to wait till it's all out to watch it all at once again when they do come out. Whereas with like an audiobook, you just put that stuff on and listen to it. I remember listening to, I don't remember which one it was, but with my parents on a trip to Kansas. Just listen to a Reacher story. It was fantastic. I don't think the audiobook is very mainstream though.
Well, I guess not yet. Um, but I think once people get sick of podcasts, that's probably potentially a next step because they've already been trained to like listen to stuff in the background while they're trying to do work. Um, it may not happen, but I think libraries having access to audiobooks online is going to make a huge difference. I think it's just a matter of people being made aware that they can take out audiobooks online from their library. Um, and I think maybe even there may be libraries that do that like nationally and allow people to sign up. I think like the New York Library or some shit. I don't know if it's New York for sure. I know there's at least a couple. Um, but it's like pretty much anybody that has like an ID in a state is gonna have access to some library that is gonna give them access to at least some variety of audiobooks where it may not be the most recent you know, I guess the most recent New York Times bestselling novel that just came out that's still hot on Amazon or Kindle or whatever, but they may even have that because I guess it just depends on how active the librarians are in those branches. So, and I guess how much funding they have too. So,
I'm pretty sure that most libraries get fairly recently released stuff. I mean, as quickly as they are available. Um, I mean, I know that there are purchasers who their whole job is just to go through and look at everything that gets released every month and add it to the list of things that they think they want to add to the collection. I think you're right, though. I think that that's like going to be the next big thing once podcasts devolve completely into commercials, long form commercials. Although I see a lot more products geared towards live streaming because it's more like radio. People want to feel like they're listening to somebody who's actually there and it's not a recording. And then a lot of live streams are of music events or of uh, like lectures or what are they called? Conferences. When people give a talk at a conference, sometimes those things get streamed. So that world is actually solidifying as a variation of like live sound engineering, sound reinforcement. I see a lot of products that are actually geared towards adding streaming to sound reinforcement. And podcast seems to be kind of baked into the capability of live streaming. So I don't know if it'll ever actually go anywhere per se, but I'm pretty sure that the trajectory for YouTube is either AI mixes of music or long form commercials. Like I don't even see very many of the channels that I do watch. There's only a couple of them that don't have any commercials ever, and the vast majority of them are just trying to sell a product or it's music. Where I'm not sure what the product is because I can't tell if I'm listening to a DJ or a playlist or just AI generated jazz.
Yeah, I keep getting a lot of AI generated hip hop like adaptations into a different genre. And I'm like, who the fuck is this for? It just feels like they're trying to scrape some shit to get enough views to monetize. Um, but it doesn't, it feels so uninspired where I'm like, oh, you're just stealing shit and then putting putting like a filter on it and making it seem like something else is like been created. Um, I guess that's why to me, I've seen maybe hmm, I'm trying to think of uses of AI that feel like they're more than novelty, and I can't really think of anything um, at least visually. Because I mean, I don't know. I can't think of anything sonically either. But regardless,
Most of the AI music stuff that I've heard is either like a jazz pianist type thing where they just say follow these rules and then it just sort of plays stuff that sounds like jazz, and a lot of that stuff I can just let go in the background because it's just a soundtrack. It's not even real. But the tools that I've seen, like AI generators for like bass lines or chord players or things that are to be used in music production, those are actually really kind of cool because a lot of them are just waiting for a prompt. They're waiting for good instructions. And so with good prompting and good instructions, some of them can turn out some really interesting stuff. And then it gets into the hands of the producer to edit it and to create some kind of nonlinear representation of that content arranged in some way to sound like music. And some of that stuff's really cool. Some of it sounds very inspired, but I also know that that person who generated those sections of the track, they probably spent a lot of time coaxing out that performance. It didn't just happen like they pressed a few buttons and bing, just like a microwave. That's not how that works. And the people that are pretending that that's how it works, I bet the shit that they're producing is actual shit, like heavily polished turds. Because that's like the bulk of what I see when I look at AI generated images, just highly polished turds. I don't think that real creatives in any industry should be afraid that um, some person is going to walk in off the street with an AI running on their phone that they're paying to access and take their job. But I do think that creatives are looking at AI tools and saying, how could I use this to do what I do? And if they find something that's good, then they might explore it because that's kind of the process of being an artist is you explore tools and see what you can make with it. And if they integrate that into their output, then cool. And if not, it doesn't really matter because they tried and they decided it wasn't for them. But I don't think that artists who are functioning at any level who can like actually make money in their craft, I don't think that they're worried about random people showing up with AI.
no, I don't think they are either. And further, I've been watching musicians who have had industry success, and basically have like retired talk about how they think AI is going to go. And they're like all very, a lot of them have that same opinion that you're saying, where it's like, um, when drum machines came in, people were saying the same shit was going to happen to drummers, but it's like, did drum machines get rid of drummers? Of course not.
No, drummers just
They,
got better.
well, and then he would like, this guy was saying, drummers started then trying to imitate drum machine fills. And so then you have this effect going the other direction where instead of getting rid of, like you're saying, they start playing more like machines, or not more like machines, more like the
Well,
machine output.
it's interesting. I've actually talked to drummers about drum machines and electronic music, and they say the same thing consistently: is that people who program drum machines and didn't learn how to play the kit, they always come up with the weirdest stuff. Some of it's really cool, and some of it's impossible to play, but it's still really cool to them. And they've everyone that I've had this kind of conversation with, they all say that they sit down and they'll try to figure out how to play that stuff because they never would have thought of playing like that because the person who programmed it probably wasn't a drummer. And while rhythmically it all does its thing just right. It sounds like a drum beat to us because we accept different things, right? It's not something that's physically easy to intuit how these things work. But there are plenty of drummers who can play really complex break beats, and there are plenty of drummers who can sound like, Mr. Dubstep drum machine. And that's awesome stuff. I love it. I love it when I encounter a drummer who can fool me into thinking that they're a drum machine. That's really impressive stuff. It's more impressive to me when a drummer can fool me into believing that they're a drum machine than when somebody programs and performs a drum machine and tries to make it sound like a real person.
It's like a reverse Turing test.
Yeah, it really is. Because no matter how realistic the drum machine sounds, there's still this element to it that's like, yeah, machine, we know you're a machine because you sound so perfect, even though you're playing like a person. Whereas when a person approaches that level of perfection, woo, chef's kiss.
Well, and so on that note, there's like, I've seen, not every drummer plays along with a metronome in their ear, but some do. And so it feels to me the ones who get closer to the machine sound do shit like that, where, yeah, if you don't have a metronome, it's going to be easy to speed up or slow down. And people aren't necessarily going to hear it, but musicians would hear it. So I think that's where when you're a musician and you hear a drummer that doesn't change their tempo for 4 minutes, it's impressive. No matter what beat they're playing, just being able to hold the same tempo for 4 minutes as a human being, it's fucking impressive. I don't care.
It requires training.
It could be the most simple.
It requires a lot of training.
It does.
Extensive training.
Adrenaline control.
Oh yeah, breath control, everything.
Breath control, endurance, like to be able to just keep that same intensity for 4 minutes straight. That's like not a long time, but to keep doing the same thing for 4 minutes straight, that requires a level of endurance that I don't think a lot of people have the discipline to get to. So there's just a lot of things about holding a beat that are super impressive if you know. And if you don't know, it's just going to sound like some drums and nobody cares if they're human or a machine. Yeah. And I think that's the difference, where if we have audiences that don't care,
well, then it doesn't matter.
Then we're going to get AI output, but enough people care that there's always going to be room for people to try to like make some shit that moves people. And I think that's where, again, that's why context matters. AI doesn't care about, it will never care about moving people until it becomes sentient and has emotions, because sentience doesn't even guarantee emotional response. And since music specifically is something that is deeply rooted in emotional response, like, I mean, not just music, but all art, it's not going to have context unless humans give it context. So it sounds like I'm hating on it when I talk, and I feel like if somebody didn't know me, be like, man, he's an AI hater. It's just, I don't even hate it so much as like, I'm not I'm not impressed with what it does. It's no different than somebody who traces, like uses the tracing paper to like do the covers off of comic books, and then never actually learns how to draw themselves, but they can like, I was doing, I remember getting the tracing paper and doing that Batman covers, and like when you trace it, it looks really fucking good. And then you try to freehand it and you're like, fuck, okay, this doesn't look anything like what I just did,
Oh, yeah.
because you didn't do it, you just traced it. So being able to like, because my thing is, I was always a musician growing up, so I never really felt the need to be good at visual arts, and I feel like that is a loss on a lot. A lot of people get good at one type of art and then never feel like the need to get good at another type, and I feel like that's part of society stunting people's growth. But eventually I got over that and learned like how to draw. And once I realized like, oh shit, all it took was like, it's not even about the taking the time to sit down to do it. It's just allowing my mind to not feel like I have to put out the cover level stuff on my first try, and to be able to work through the motions of being a novice in something, and like getting over the feeling of like, that's not the best output because I know these other people are really good, but I don't care. I'm just gonna keep doing it anyway. And eventually your shit gets better. And it's like, oh, that's what I did with piano, or that's what I did with saxophone, or that's what I did with writing music. And because it was easier, because I was good at sonic art, I just stayed in what was comfortable instead of trying to do something different. And I think a lot of people are put in that state of like, stay comfortable once you find something that's comfortable, instead of like constantly challenging yourself to growth.
Yeah, I think it's I think it's gonna change the dynamic a lot. AI, especially because the iterative process is very different when you're working at the speed of a computer that's only waiting for you to think. And so once you think and tell it, then it can react. And once that's dialed in, then somebody can, you know, their output is limited only by their ability to interact with the AI. But at the same time, is that enough time for on the human side of the equation to develop that kind of discipline and that kind of intuitive behavior that usually requires years for musicians and artists to develop? Not that some people aren't just gifted like right out the gate, because that's definitely a thing, but there still has been like a storied history of training where people, you know, lock themselves into the metaphorical woodshed and chip away until they emerge a you know, fully realized and all that kind of thing. um, I don't think that the person who's willing to put in 10,000 hours to learn how to do something, like to master something, is afraid of the person who is only going to put in a couple hundred hours to learn how to use some software, if even couple hundred hours before they start trying to actually use it. And like a lot of the plugins, the music making plugins, those are just like, you know, add it to your DAW and then press go and press a few buttons. But I think a lot of those things need to be treated like whole entire instruments. They have to be learned like inside and out before a person can really, you know, fully take advantage of all the capabilities. But maybe that's unnecessary. Maybe for a producer's needs, they only need like 10% of the capabilities. And maybe that 10% gives them what they're looking for. And I'm not sure what that is, of course, because I can't project into the minds of another artist making music. But I don't think I don't think that's even a threat to the process itself. It's just another tool. It's just another thing that may or may not be able to help somebody express themselves through creativity. And you know, there's always some synthesizer genius out there who figures out, you know, how the synthesizer works before anyone else does, and unlocks the features that the programmers only dreamed would work the way they do. And there's always that person. But that person is rare. They're like, you know, one out of hundreds of millions. They might not know the right people to get any kind of attention.
Well, and the fact that that person exists isn't going to stop someone from wanting to listen to Metallica.
Exceptional Radio. Exceptional Randos shows produced live in Sunroom Studios' Bass Capsule. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Well, that was random.
Exceptional Radio.